Buenas tardes and welcome back to our Financial Empowerment Charla series with Nationwide. I'm Antonio Tijerino of the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, and we're privileged to provide this critical information to our community during this time of crisis thanks to our year-round partnership with Nationwide. On our last Charla, we convened experts in the industry to provide tools and actionable insights regarding net worth and creating a spending plan. On today's Charla, we're going to have Paul Roldan, who's coming back, and Karen Vergara from All-Gen Financial Advisors to share strategies for creating an effective debt elimination plan. And I need it more than anybody. Joining us today as a guest speaker, we have Janet Cruz Padrón, founder of Latina Money. Janet will share her personal story, which I can assure you is truly inspiring. I'm also happy to announce that All-Gen Financial Services will be offering everyone joining today's Charla their online financial literacy program for free. Please use the link that's going to be shared in the chat box by our team to take advantage of this unique opportunity, and use the chat box as well to just give energy or to comment when the speakers are sharing their knowledge with you. Thank you to those Charla speakers for providing us with their expertise, advice, and answering our questions, as well as working on getting all of us on a better financial path during and post-COVID. And that's really important distinction because we're in the middle of a crisis, but post-COVID, we're still going to be in a crisis and have to adapt because it's going to continue. And it causes anxiety, not just with our health, but with our finances and in a lot of other ways. It is my great honor to introduce my friend and Associate Vice President, Enterprise, Diverse, and Cause Marketing at Nationwide, Lou Yarbrough III. Lou, thank you and Nationwide for continued commitment to our community and to the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. We were chatting before how well received these Charlas have been, and not just the impact, but the interchange in terms of the dialogue that's been started. So I just want to thank you. This is a creative way of reaching our community and sharing these resources and knowledge, and our speakers are just tremendous.
Tony, thank you so much for that introduction. It's been nothing but a pleasure to partner with you, as you have said, in this very, very impactful work that we've provided. Again, my name is Lou Yarbrough. I'm Associate Vice President of Enterprise, Diverse, and Cause Marketing for Nationwide. And Nationwide is a proud partner with the Hispanic Heritage Foundation to offer this virtual Charla today as part of our Financial Empowerment Charla program. You know, this program is intended to provide you with access to financial experts and tools to help you in your journey to financial wellness. You know, we also acknowledge the fact that the Hispanic community has been disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19, and we want to be here to support you in that. You know, our partnership with the Hispanic Heritage Foundation and the development of this program reinforces Nationwide's commitment to helping the Hispanic community through these uncertain times and beyond. Again, today's Charla is the second in a series of 3 where you will learn the importance of eliminating debt and managing risk. You know, our guest speakers will not only inspire you, but they'll also share some practical tips and tools to help you create a debt elimination plan and improve your financial health. And as we get started today, it's my pleasure to welcome back from our first conversation, one of our guest speakers and the moderator for today, Paul Roldan. Paul is originally from New York City. He received his bachelor's degree from Princeton, a graduate degree from Harvard, and after working at the Federal Reserve Bank as a financial analyst, he moved to Orlando, where he was confronted with a different economy there, which started his journey as an entrepreneur in the financial services industry, and today is the CEO of All-Gen Financial. So with that, if you will, please join me in welcoming our moderator for today, Mr. Paul Roldan. Paul, take it away.
Thank you, Lou. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to be in such great company, such as Tony, Lou, and your respective teams. And I just want to quickly take a moment to thank you guys for giving me this opportunity to share a little bit about, I mean, it's a passion for me, and it's what I do. So this isn't work. This is, you know, a gift to be able to share and commend you guys for taking the initiative to have these conversations, to host these conversations. And it's not just a conversation, but it's really applicable themes, tools that we can take and use to make a difference in our financial lives, especially during a time where everyone's being hit so hard with what's going on globally. So thank you again for that. And I'm going to jump right in because I know at the first charla, I want to welcome all the guests and encourage you to ask questions throughout. We will reserve answering the questions till the end of the conversation, but please feel free to chat, to use them in the Q&A section on the portion of your screen as we go, and then we'll go and try to answer all those questions at the end of this conversation. But I know last time we had several questions and we want to make sure we have time for that. So without further ado, I'd like to quickly jump into the agenda of what we're going to cover today. I want to invite you, if you did not listen to the first charla, remember, this is a 3-part series. I'm going to encourage you to go to the Hispanic Heritage website, the Nationwide website. There's going to be a link shared where you can actually, I believe, get a download of the recorded session. These are being recorded so that you can go afterwards and listen, and there'll be a follow-up email. So, because it's great, it's a lot of information. I promise you, you will not get a bachelor's degree after the 45-minute talk that we give you, but it will be a good, hopefully, motivator for you to start taking the right steps to make a difference in your financial life. So encourage you to connect with the links that will be shared with you at the end and the post follow-up email. That being said, here's what we're going to cover today. First, as I said, we don't want to just have a conversation, a theoretical conversation. We want to see how this can really affect our lives, okay? And part of doing that is actually having someone speak to you to share how the theme and the subject matter has impacted their lives, how they've applied it to themselves or helped others apply it. So I'm going to first introduce Janet Cruz Padrón in a second, who's going to share some of her story and what she's doing, which is great for a great resource for our country. Then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of debt elimination strategies. And again, I'm going to tell you, bear with us because this is not some of the fanciest subject matter, if you will. And a lot of people stay away from finances because it's like, oh, math or dreaded numbers. But the only way you're going to make a difference in your financial life is to take it head on and take control of it. So we're going to talk about debt elimination. Then we're going to talk about some risk management strategies. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to then address your questions at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce one of our speakers today, Janet Cruz Padrón, who heads up Latina Money, and I'm going to encourage you. She'll talk to you about this a little bit further if you want to go ahead to the next slide. But she's the one who encourages conversations, especially to educate and empower Latina women to take their finances to another level. So I'm not even going to talk anymore and take away from her time. Janet, please share with us all you've been doing.
Hola, mi gente. Muchísimas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros hoy día. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I am Janet Cruz Padrón, founder of the financial empowerment platform, Latina Money. With so much going on in the world right now, it's so incredibly important for each and every single one of us to find a moment in each of our individual lives to really just pause and connect and reconnect with ourselves in mind, body, spirit, and bank account as much as we possibly can to, be able to better navigate these challenging times. With Latinas currently standing as the lowest paid demographic in the United States, it really is no secret that our community as a whole are really not strangers to the financial struggle. And, very rarely do we shy away from facing that struggle head on, but there is so much that gets sacrificed along the way. As a first generation Latina, daughter of immigrant parents, I witnessed the people that I love the most slowly deteriorate from, as they battle degenerative diseases that were sped up by a lifetime of manual labor. And what that experience instilled in me was that fire and that drive to learn what it takes to get and feel more in control of my money so that money wouldn't have to work me or any of my loved ones into an early grave. And it was, essentially that fire that ultimately served as the inspiration of what is now Latina Money. So by fusing education, media, technology, and storytelling, Latina Money is empowering modern women, our entire Latino community, to lift the taboo and harness the tremendous power that money has to write and rewrite cultural narratives. I believe that there's tremendous massive power that comes with talking money can have in positively transforming and elevating entire cultures and communities. And, you know, of course, all great change stems from first talking about it. And, you know, money is no exception. I Speak Dinero has become Latina Money's signature movement that's helping to transform the way our community relates to money and supporting us as we cultivate a healthier relationship with our own dinero. But, you know, as true guerreros and guerreras, we don't just talk about it, we be about it, right? Which is why we've all come together in support of the Financial Empowerment Charla series. So, you know, whether it seems like it or not at this moment, the next chapter of your life is coming sooner than you think. And using this time right now to really take honest inventory of your life, what is working and what is not working alike, is going to support you in getting to that fast track towards creating and ultimately living your best financial life in that next chapter. You know, with so many things have changing around us that have left some major bumps and bruises in our pocketbook, you know, our community has been severely affected by this crisis, not only from a health standpoint, but from a financial standpoint as well. But while the pandemic has, you know, knocked us off our center and, you know, been incredibly unsettling for our community, it has also brought along with it an incredible opportunity for us to, as individuals, to change and to pivot in ways that will allow us to emerge bigger and better. Of course, one of the requirements for emerging bigger and better is that you get right with your money, which includes crafting a debt elimination plan that leaves you feeling empowered and motivated for that journey ahead. And I'm so honored to be here with you today to support you and all of the attendees as you navigate your own debt elimination journey.
Excellent. Thank you, Janet, so much for that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's so important what you do to encourage that conversation, to engage people, to motivate, inspire. And I say that because culturally speaking, as Latino, I know that we didn't really talk about money in my household. You know, my parents were hardworking, but it's not a typical topic of conversation, especially intergenerationally. So I think it's so critical. I've been blessed to be able to have that conversation with my teenage sons because I think it's critical that we start owning our own finances. You hear the statistics, how, you know, the buying power that Latinos have in this country, and that's great. But is it just about consumerism, or is it about Latinos taking control of their finances and building something with that in addition to the consumer power that we bring? So that's why these studies are important. So Janet, thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and we'll have Janet back at the end to help us answer some questions. But let's jump right into this. One of the ways we jump into empowering ourselves to be better and stronger with our money is to stop paying interest. And we're going to get some quotes and some tools on this. But to do this, I'm not going to do this by myself. I invited one of my colleagues, if we can go to the next slide, Karen Vergara, to join me in this conversation. And I thought it was critical that I bring Karen to the fold, because one, as you can see, we're diverse culturally, even within our own Latin American culture and history, but at the same time, even gender-wise, okay? So Karen is a financial advisor, works with me, but she's a CPA, worked with one of the big four. I'm bragging about her because she'll never brag about herself, okay? But worked with one of the big four firms, recruited heavily out of college, went there, then left ultimately because she said, I don't feel this is my calling in life, but I want to help people. And she's been able to embody, and she is a living testament of a lot of the principles we're about to teach here that we've been teaching in the 3-part series. With I know Karen personally, and again, she'll never say this, but I have permission to share someone. She is debt free. Okay, she's a young entrepreneur. She owns real estate. She has rental properties, and she's been to several. I'm gonna let her tell you. This is gonna be the first assignment when she comes on live. How many countries, because her passion is traveling, she's been able to visit because she has no debt and is in control of her finances. So that being said, I'm gonna ask Karen to join us, and we're gonna start the next slide, which is debt elimination. And I'm going to actually have Karen talk us through that conversation. So Karen, if you wouldn't mind leading the conversation here, and I already gave you your first question. How many countries have you visited because you are financially empowered?
Yes, I've visited 41 countries. So that is a lot of countries, but yeah, that's my passion. And one of the things that, you know, that having no debt having no debt has really allowed me to do is being able to enjoy my money in a way that makes me, brings me happiness. So thank you, Paul, for that. We're going to go ahead and then start talking about debt elimination. So we'll start with, what is consumer debt? Well, what is consumer debt? Is debt that is owed as a result of purchasing goods used for personal consumption. So that includes credit cards, student loans, and car loans. So I know Paul asked me a question, but I'm actually going to go ask you guys a question, and we're going to go into our first polling question, which is, how much debt do you have?
Now you should be able to choose here on the survey, and I promise these are confidential. So There's no shame factor, no judgment factor. It's just really to get a poll to get you guys engaged, and we're gonna actually turn this question over on its head and showing how we compare as a population compared to general statistics that we're going to share next. So how much debt you have, consumer debt, I guess is what the question should
Correct.
say.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, non-mortgage. So we're talking about just credit cards, student loans, and car loan. If you just add all of that up, how much consumer debt do you have?
Thank you, Deanna, for asking that question.
Yeah, that was a very good question. All right, so let's give you just a couple more seconds and let's see what those answers are.
All right.
Okay, so we can see that the majority of you, it's kind of spread out, but the majority have just about 40% of you have over $30,000 of debt. Okay, so let's see how you compare, your answers compare to the rest of the US. So let's go to the next slide, please. So did you know that the average household in the US has over $30,000 in consumer debt? So all of you that said option D, you're not alone. The average car payment for a new vehicle is over $500. Average used car payment is just about $400. The average student loan payment is about $400 per month. The average student loan debt balance is a little bit under $30,000. And the average credit card balance is about $6,000 with $123 in monthly minimum payment in average.
You know me, I know you. Folks, we're not trying to sound negative or be Debbie Downers. We're not sharing this to discourage anyone. But in order to make a change, you have to know where you're at. Okay, so we're just trying to say, okay, where are we? And I promise you, I'm one of the most positive people you'll ever meet in terms of my outlook on life. But it's important that you know, and that's why we started with a polling question to say, if you know where you're at, then you can determine what's the best way to get to where you want to go. So go for it, Karen.
Exactly. So let's go to, well, before we go to the next question, Andres, I actually want to remind, if you didn't join us on our first charla, I shared a statistic with you guys. I said that between 80 to 88% of millionaires are actually self-made here in the US, okay? So that is really encouraging because that means that they did not inherit their wealth. These are just people that decided to be proactive and intentional about building wealth and ultimately becoming millionaires. So if we just start with that idea that we have the ability to be millionaires, we have the ability to build wealth, we need to say, what are the things that millionaires do to become millionaires if most of them are self-made? Well, let's go to the next slide. And we'll actually hear from Warren Buffett, who's not just a millionaire, he's a billionaire. And this is what he says: you never want to owe money you can't pay. I'm basically against debt. I think the average individual will live a lot happier in life if they avoid debt. They surely ought to avoid credit card debt. There's no reason in the world to pay 18% for my stuff. I can't make money paying 18% for money. Again, he's a billionaire. So let's ask ourselves, why is Warren Buffett, a self-made billionaire, against debt? Well, I have the answer for you, and it's called compounding interest. So if we go to the next slide, we'll kind of explain to you what this is. So compound interest is the addition of interest to the principal sum of a loan or an investment. So in other words, it's just interest on top of interest. Albert Einstein called it the 8th wonder of the world. And in order to illustrate this concept, we have an example for you. Let's say that you have a credit card and it has a $5,000 credit limit, and you go to your favorite store and buy $5,000 worth of stuff. And at a 10% interest rate, which by the way, most credit cards are not 10%, that's being very conservative, and just for illustrative purposes right now, we're saying at a 10% interest rate, you go ahead and swipe your card. And then you start making minimum payments. The minimum payments that your credit card statement tells you to send, $65 every month. Okay, so that's what you do. You start sending $65 a month to your credit card. After 10 years, you would have paid your balance. But not just that, you would have ended up paying over $8,000, including your $5,000 and then $3,000 in interest. So that is compounding interest working against you.
So you paid 60% more than you actually borrowed.
That's right. And most of the time, these are things that are depreciable assets. So a TV that after 10 years doesn't really work, or a computer, or just clothes, right? So we bought something at a certain price and that depreciated in value, and I ended up paying more for it. Yeah. So the other thing that you can do, so then what is compound interest working actually for you? Well, what we do is, instead of spending money that we don't have, we invest $5,000 at a hypothetical 10% interest rate. After 10 years, same time frame, you don't just have $5,000, you have $14,266. Again, the power of using compound interest to help you build wealth rather than help, or how financial institutions and banks make their money, is then by having it work against you.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that swing, it's either negative 8,000 or 14. That's a $22,000 swing. That's a quadruple your number. So we have to make a choice. Which side of the fence do we want to be on? The one where we're paying interest or we're accumulating interest, right? And you know, just to keep this real, you'll see these things. You know, if it's too good to be true, people. Again, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a very down-to-earth real person. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. So you see this: buy now a bedroom set, 0 interest for 12 months. Okay. That sounds amazing. And what do people do? Okay, well, I'm going to pay it off in 12 months. You know, these offers are done with statisticians and psychologists, behavioral psychologists, creating the offers on behalf of, let me not name any stores, but on behalf of these institutions, because they know the majority of you will not pay it off in 12 months. So what happens, they get you in the door, and then they lump sum a year's worth of interest if you don't pay it off on month 11, actually on month 10 and a half, because you got to read the fine print of when it gets credited to your account. So if you'd want to avoid at all costs paying interest, don't take it from me. If you don't want to take it from me, take it from Warren Buffett. The guy knows a thing or two.
Exactly. So now you might say, okay, Karen and Paul, I get it. Now I understand the reason why I really should avoid debt, but I already have some debt. So how do I eliminate it? Well, let's go to the next slide, and we're going to show you this great method that has worked time and time again. So I shared also in the first charla. So for those of you who did not join us on that first charla, I shared that my husband and I, when I married my husband had $60,000 worth of debt. So that included student loans, credit card, car loans. So one of the things that we did was that we needed to get rid of it, right? We needed to get rid of all this debt. So for 18 months, we had some short-term sacrifices and we paid off the debt. And this is exactly the method that we used. We used the snowball method. So what is the snowball method like? Well, the first thing that we do is that we're going to make a list of all of your debts. Okay. So it doesn't really matter the balance. It doesn't matter the interest rate. We're just truly at this point, just making a list of all of the debt. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to start by paying off the lowest balance as quickly as possible. The third step is that once we pay off the first balance, the lowest balance, we're going to use that monthly payment and continue adding it to the other balances. So effectively kind of creating a snowball effect. And we're going to repeat this process until all the debt is paid off, until we really get to our biggest balance. And that's when we're going to have already accumulated a lot of monthly payments that we can apply to it. And not just that, but it's going to feel really good to know that we've already dealt with a lot of those smaller debts until we get to the big one.
Karen, I know you're going to give a precise example of tools to use this and do this, but before you go there, I want to say two things. You said when you got married, 18 months, you decided proactively to sacrifice yourselves for 18 months to put yourself in a position of having zero debt, and now all the money you earned is truly your money and not paying interest to anybody else. Versus the examples we gave, which last 5, 8, 10, 15 years of being in debt, okay? Because when you think about $60,000, that's a lot of debt to pay off. So what we're saying is, yes, this isn't easy, but it does require a sacrifice. But what is it to make a short-term sacrifice for longer-term peace and empowerment, which compounding empowerment in long-term is what's going to take you to another level. I say the same thing. I made a sacrifice when I got married. I had no debt. But my wife did, because she's an attorney, and you know how attorneys then graduate law school and their financial aid package is a 6-figure loan package. So I told her, we're going to sacrifice. We're going to live off of my income till we pay off your debt. And it was a couple of years, but a couple of years later, she paid us 6-figure student loans, because that's how I firmly believe, and the relief that comes when you don't have that. And now all of a sudden that money we were using to plow into that debt is disposable income. So we've been able to go to Europe a few times, and I'm saying this to brag, people, please know this. This is because we want to tell you this works. This is real. Now, I know Karen's about to go into some of the tools, so go ahead, show us how we make this happen.
Yeah, so let's go into kind of the next step on how we make this happen. This debt reduction calculator, by the way, is going to be available if you join our Allgen Academy, which I know that we have already sent out the link, and you will get an email tomorrow with the link as well if you need to. But this is what we do. Again, we list all the debts. In this case, we're going to say, okay, we're just going to continue making the payments, but we're not going to do any snowball method. We're just trying to see how long it's going to take us to just pay this off if we don't add more to the debt. So as you can see here, down at the bottom, you can see that it's going to take about 9 years to pay all of this off. And this person would have paid an interest of just over $10,000.
So they have $38,000 of debt, which, right? 38,749.
Correct.
And if we're using today's, or August, in January 2029, you would have paid it all off if you're just making the regular payments.
Exactly. Just making those minimum payments, it's going to take 9 years to pay this off. So let's go into then our next slide, which actually shows you what if we just send a little bit more and we apply this snowball method, okay? And I know I saw someone ask about, am I not supposed to be sending my payments to just to pay off the highest interest rate? No. Again, it goes back to the psychology of things. We're trying to really feel empowered by the fact that we're getting rid of these smaller debts, and then we're going to work on that big one.
Now, let me qualify this, if I may, yeah. Karen, because Karen speaks with conviction, because she's put people through this, and so have I in the last 20 years that I've been a financial advisor. Yes, mathematically, if you pay the highest interest rate loans, you will end up paying less interest over your lifetime. What happens is that a lot of this is behaviorally and psychologically driven, okay? So what we're suggesting is a way that has proven that people actually are able to follow through because they stay motivated. A lot of the New Year's resolutions, why do people drop gym memberships after 3 months? It's because of the motivation that it's required to keep you going. So what we're sharing with you may not be the mathematically most efficient way, but at the end of the day, it's not about the math, it's about you actually getting rid of your debt. So in this example, if you say, okay, I'm gonna start with my highest interest rate, you would leave your auto loan for last, right? But then you'd be tackling the student loan sooner, and $21,000 is going to take you several years to pay off. You might lose motivation. So yes, while mathematically it makes sense to do the highest interest, in all reality, for the most part, most human beings need to stay motivated. And that's why we say, let's get rid of one. The moment you see that gone, hey, this is cool, let's get the next one. And we try to keep you motivated in this approach. Sorry, Karen.
No, that's exactly right. And so in this method, what we're going to do is we're going to take just a little extra. We're going to say this person said, I'm going to just find $350 more in my spending plan, which if you didn't watch the first charla, please watch that whenever you have a chance. But this person found $350 in their spending that they can actually go ahead and use to eliminate debt. So now they're sending these extra $350 a month and using the snowball method, you can see here that they're actually going to be debt-free 6 years earlier, just about 6 years earlier. And they're only going to pay, not only, I mean, they're still going to pay some interest, but it's a lot less. They're only paying about $4,500 compared to over $10,000 in interest. So this is the ability for you to accelerate debt and get rid of debt as soon as possible. It's really then going to be able to help you then free up that cash, because then what's going to happen is when you have paid all that debt, you're going to have $1,200 left over for you to figure out, okay, what do I do with it? You can do like me, start traveling or buy investment properties or just, you know, do different things. And so that's really the power of eliminating debt. So let's go to the next slide, because the other, if we know that we have to eliminate debt, and that's one piece of it, but the other piece of it is that we need to stop acquiring more debt. We need to avoid new debt. And so the way we do that is that, number one, we're going to establish and maintain an emergency fund, which Paul is going to talk about in just a few minutes. We're going to adopt a spending plan, which we talked about in the first charla. You're going to have adequate insurance. Again, also something Paul is going to share in a second. And then you're going to save up and pay for things in cash. So no more instant gratification. I'm just going to go ahead and take my credit card and swipe it and deal with the payments later. Let's just have a plan. If there's something that you want, that's not a problem. You can have it as long as it's not really, you're not acquiring debt, because if you remember, that's compounding interest working against you and not for you.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, one of the biggest pushbacks I get, you know, save up and pay for things in cash. It's like, wait, so does that include a car? You know, you're telling me I'm going to pay for a car in cash? Yeah, we are telling you exactly that. Okay, and I'm saying that because you don't want to owe anything to anyone, and it's powerful because this is, we talked about budgeting in the previous example, in the previous charla. Okay, and part of that budget includes your payment for your next car. Okay, so you have to be intentional about this. So when I'm ready to buy my car, which is usually about every 5 to 6 years in my case, I've been saving for 5 to 6 years as part of my budget, so that when it's time to buy my car, I pay for it cash. Okay, and sometimes if you're younger, it may take time for you to build enough emergency as your income goes up, enough savings to buy a better car. So yeah, you're going to sacrifice short term. My first car was not the hottest car of the year, okay, but I slowly built up to now I buy a car that I really like and I pay for cash because it's part of the budgeting that we talked about in the first charla. Okay, so yes, the goal is for you to be that strong financially that you can pay for things, vacations, cars in cash, and believe me, people, it's very doable.
Yes, absolutely, and you can totally do it. Remember, 88% of millionaires are self-made. So it just takes intentionality, discipline, and consistency. So let's go to the next slide so we can see how can you accelerate debt payoff. Because once you start seeing those debts come off your list, you're going to get really excited and you're going to figure out ways to make sure that you pay that off real quick. So things that you can do are sell items that you don't need. I recently sold an Xbox 360 that my husband had. It was very old and we got $150 for it. I couldn't believe it. People were willing to pay for an old Xbox that still worked. So you can do the same. You can work extra hours, start a side hustle. You can reduce non-essential expenses. Do you really need to have Hulu and Disney Plus and Netflix, or can you just, you have one because that's the one that where you see your shows the most on? And then change your spending habits. Again, going back to the whole idea that we're doing this for a short-term period of time. We're not doing this forever. We're only going to do it until we can get rid of the debt, so then we can enjoy our money because we are out of the debt.
So there's a saying that says, you know, and this is Dave Ramsey said this, if you want to live like no other, you have to live like no other. You know, and it sounds very simple, but what we're talking about is something that's not really taught in schools. And you know, I appreciate Lou's great introduction. You know, I was blessed, you know, that I have parents, you know, an immigrant mom from Cuba and a high school dropout dad, but they always encouraged me to study. So I was blessed to be able to get 2 Ivy League educations. But they never taught me financial principles in school. And in fact, it was okay to borrow to get student loans. And yes, student loans are one of the big things that strap our young people today. You know, I've had people in my office crying because they just got married and they're about to have a baby. One got laid off, but they owe X amount in student loans, you know, and that's not a good way to spend anything in life, but especially not a pregnancy, okay, when you're, you know, recently married. So it is, while this is not the norm of what you hear out there, it is a way to live like no other. It does go against the capitalism that is trying to, and I'm not, you know, anti-capitalism, but understand you want to be capitalistically getting interest and enjoying consumer interest for yourself versus paying interest to someone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it summarizes this portion of this charla so well. If we go to the next slide, you know, at the end of the day, your goal is to accumulate positive net worth and build long-term wealth and even generational wealth. So how do we achieve that? We stop paying interest to someone else and we start earning interest on your own money.
So Karen, I appreciate this because obviously this is one of those tough areas it's a hard conversation. I'm about to get into a tougher conversation, okay? But this is where you have to start making some changes in order to really have a long-term impact on your financial picture, okay? And when I say that is, you know, the whole getting rid of debt, again, it is not what we're taught. You would think, okay, I went one time and a guy who sells cars, he couldn't fathom getting a car without financing it for his clients. And I'm like, I don't want to, you know. And then when I bought my house, they're asking me, oh, so how much, you know, what's your debt to income ratio? I said, are you asking just consumer debt? They're like, yeah, you know, credit cards. I said, 0. No. What do you owe on your credit cards and cars relative to your income that you make? I said, 0. I don't have a car payment. And that was like unfathomable. Like they had to write I had to write a letter to the underwriters to say, I don't believe in debt. And yes, I got great financing and all that type of stuff, but it's interesting, their hurdles, because it does not compute with a lot of financial institutions that someone could actually be at a point where they're not paying interest to someone else. And please, if you join this late, we are not saying this to boast. This is not our heart at all. It's to let you know that, you know, I came from poor upbringing, Karen also immigrant, but we apply these principles and we're living them because they work. So our goal is to motivate you and inspire you to take control of your finances and take it to the next level. Now, that being said, I'm going to jump into a tough situation or conversation because it's risk management, okay? And it's managing risk. Why is this critical? Okay, if we can go to the next slide. What is managing risk? Okay, managing risk, you know, effective risk management helps you protect what you've built, okay? And it increases the odds of you actually achieving your financial, your goals. So it is the point where you want to build. Everybody wants to build, and that's great, okay? But you want to build on a good, strong foundation, okay? Kind of, if there's any people who are in construction, I know Karen's husband's in construction, okay? You don't build on, you know, flimsy soil or foundation because that can come crumbling down, okay? So I live in Florida. Now the windows have to have hurricane, you know, codes and all that type of stuff because you don't want that. You want it to last once it's built. Same thing with your finances. Risk management is about protecting what you have or the potential risks of that could happen, okay? So that when you start building, you have it built on a strong foundation and increases the odds of you reaching those goals, okay? So that being said, you know, there's a quote, if we go to the next slide, it says, risk is like fire. If controlled, it would help you. If uncontrolled, it will rise up and destroy you, okay? So that being said, we wanna say, what are some strategies to managing risk to hopefully increase my ability to reach my financial goals? So if we go to the next slide, here's some strategies. I'm going to go high level and then get deeper on each one very briefly. Number one, you want to create an emergency fund. Okay, and I'm going to say you almost want to do these things in this order. Okay, so you want to create an emergency fund. I'm going to get a little deeper into what that should look like. Consider an insurance policy. I say consider, it depends. Okay, I personally don't sell life insurance. Okay, but it is a risk management tool, especially if you're married, if you have children, you have liabilities, it could be, you know, a tool that you need. Sometimes I tell people, well, you may not need life insurance, okay? But that's why it says consider, it depends, okay? Obtain disability insurance. Again, you're protecting your paycheck, okay? So people protect their house, they protect the car, but especially if you're younger, the odds that you die are less than the odds of you getting hurt and not being able to work. So sometimes at work we have disability insurance, but sometimes we don't. And then why not protect our biggest asset, which is our income producing tool, which is our paycheck, okay? So possibly obtain disability insurance depending on your income. Obtain health insurance. This is a tough one. Health insurance, I know, has become such a complicated topic. The premiums have gone up unless you qualify for government subsidy, but this is protecting against the what ifs in life, okay? Again, I'm a very positive, optimistic person, but life happens, okay? A few years ago, I had to be hospitalized for a few weeks. I'm glad I had health insurance, okay? I didn't expect it. I didn't say, oh, you know what, let me get health insurance because in 2 years, I'm probably gonna, we don't, these are for the what ifs of life, okay? And then establish a basic estate plan. I'm gonna get into what that means. But as we get into this now, and I see questions are coming, please keep the questions coming on whether it's this or death management. I wanna ask you a question right back, okay? So if we go to the next slide, again, totally anonymous, no judgment, no one knows what you said. But how much savings do you have for a rainy day? Less than 1,000, 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, over $10,000. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to answer that question. This is for a rainy day, not for retirement in my 401k. That's not rainy day money. That's for my future. Savings for a rainy day. Enough time, Karen? What do you think?
I think so. I think that's good.
All right. So Andres, what are we looking at as far as answers? Uh-oh, we didn't get answers.
Yeah, we do have them. Maybe
Oh,
we're
they
not
didn't show
seeing
up on
them.
my screen. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Why don't
Yeah,
you read
so
them?
it looks like 23% of folks have less than $1,000. About 40% have between 1,000 to 5,000. 9% have between 5 to 10, and 29%, which is very good to see, have over $10,000 in savings.
Very good. Very good. So, you know, that's actually inspiring to me, okay? Because as I wrote those down, okay, how many had, I'm sorry, read them one more time since I can't see them.
Oh, I closed the
Okay,
the
but you
screen.
said there was a percentage, 40%, I think, were in a good category. Let's look at the next slide. How do we compared to the rest, how do we look compared to the rest of the country? So here's where Americans are. We call this the emergency fund, the rainy day fund, okay? In this survey, okay, you can see that 69% of the people who responded had less than $1,000, had $1,000 or less in savings. Okay.
Yeah, I think ours was 23%.
We're doing much better than the rest of the country, people. That's
Yeah.
inspiring. Okay, that's great. Okay. Now, why is this important? Okay. The emergency fund is the first place that you should address your risk management. And if you know, statistics show that 2/3 of this country is living paycheck to paycheck. Okay, and this is this statistic right here. If something happens, you lose your job, you know, your car breaks down and it costs $2,000, you don't have money to save. You don't have money to pay for it, right? So what do? You're gonna go back into Karen's side of the lecture and get into debt. Okay, so this is why this risk management piece, the emergency fund, is so important, so that it avoids you having to get into debt when life happens. Okay, now go ahead. You were about to ask something, Karen?
Yeah, so if you have debt, should you focus on getting the emergency fund, or should you focus on paying down debt?
And she works with me, so she knows I'm going to answer this. But let's go to the next slide, okay? Creating an emergency fund. Here's what I believe, okay? And this is how I counsel people to approach you having debt, because you don't want to pay interest. We talked about how horrible paying interest is. At the same time, you want to be protecting an emergency. So we kind of break it down into two-step emergency fund, two-tier emergency fund. We call it the baby emergency fund and a fully funded emergency fund. Phase one, if you have debt, okay, we say get up to $1,000. Hopefully that will cover most emergency, flat tires, a car repair, you have to change the battery or whatever in your car. Hopefully $1,000 will cover you for emergencies as they happen. Okay, hopefully you have health insurance, all that type of stuff as well. Okay, so you don't have to, with that $1,000, save that aside, not in your checking account, in a whole separate account, and accelerate the debt payment using the tools that Karen gave you, so that once you have your consumer debt paid off, then you use that same money to initially fully fund an emergency fund. Okay, a fully funded emergency fund is typically 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Okay, now this is critical. It depends on your personal circumstance. If you're a single person, it's very different than if you're a married person with two-income household. If you're a married person but only one person works, that's very different, okay, because there's a heavier weight on that one income. So that's why we give a range, 3 to 6 months of emergency of living expenses, what's your emergency fund, depending on your particular circumstances. I've even told some people you need a 12 months. because they're single, they're the only income, they have dependents, single parents, and they're in an industry where it's hard to get rehired. It might take you 6 to 12 months to get a job. You don't want to take any chances in that situation. So it depends, but this is typical averages. Does that make sense, Karen? Did I answer your question?
Yes. And so where should you put this money?
So typically speaking, I'll tell you where my emergency fund is. Right now, I have it in a high yield money market account. Okay. This is hard because I don't know if there's any bankers in the room. I'm not trying to offend anybody, okay? But we know interest rates are low right now, okay? A banker will tell you interest rates are low right now. So in the savings, typical savings or checking, you might get 0.1%, you know? And you're not trying to make a lot of money on your emergency fund, okay? But, you know, I'm trying to optimize every single dollar that I make. I work hard enough for it. So I have a high yield money market account. You can Google it. There's plenty. There's a lot of online banks, institutions that do that. And they're offering a little over 1%, I believe, right now. So that's, I mean, again, not a lot of money, but it's better than 0.1%. It's not money that I'm not touching, that I'm just letting earn interest over the course of the year. Is that a fair answer?
Yep.
All right. So step number one would be, let's get an emergency fund done. Next step or strategy, if we go to the next slide, is actually getting some life insurance. Okay. Life insurance, what is life insurance? It's the ability for those you leave behind in the case you die to pay off any burdens that they may be assuming, aka a spouse or a child or things of that nature. Okay, so that is what life insurance is. It's a benefit. It's death insurance is what it is. Is if you die, you get a death benefit. Okay, why is it important? Because me, in my case, I've got a wife, I've got kids. I don't want to be, if something happens to me, I don't want my family to be left in a financially burdened situation. Okay, so I have insurance on my life that if something, God forbid, will happen to me, they're going to be okay because they'll get the death benefit and be able to continue financially.
Now,
Karen,
Paul,
you look like you have a question.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot of people say that life insurance can be good, it can be used to save for kids' college education and for retirement, but you're saying that it really should be used only if someone depends on your income.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because you'll have different opinions on this one. You know, first of all, before I go there, that's what type I should get, because there's term and then there's cash value life insurance. But the third is how much I need. How much I need depends on your income structure, how many people depend on your income. I mean, a generic rule of thumb is 10 to 15 times your annual income, which seems really high, but it may not be that high. Some people say, I'm young, single, I don't need insurance, but maybe I get it because I may not be insurable later. Okay, I encourage you to speak to an insurance agent about this. To determine exactly, it's a mathematical calculation of income replacement to determine how much you need. But Karen, you brought up a great question. You know, there's different types of life insurance, okay? And you'll hear these term is the most basic life insurance that exists. It's very cheap, assuming you don't have any health considerations, and you're basically paying a little bit of premium every month for a potential decent death benefit, okay? Now you stop paying the premium, no more death benefit, okay? So that's the contract, okay? But it's the cheapest way to get yourself insured. Then there's these other types of insurance, variable, universal, cash value, all that type of stuff that have all kinds of investments or savings components built in. And people say you could use those for retirement and it's tax-free and all that type of stuff. My philosophy is be careful of things that get too complicated. Okay, especially if you're starting in your journey, because if you're starting in your journey, these policies require more cash up front, okay? And there's other fees inherent with them. And you want to simplify your life, build your emergency fund, pay off your debt. That's your focus right now, okay? So I would typically say, especially if you're starting the path, you know, to your financial freedom, stay away from the cash value stuff. Don't mix one thing up with the other as far as education or retirement. I don't want to get into a whole insurance conversation because it could be very deep and it could depend on who you are. But my initial top high level view is keep it simple. I'm going to be a big proponent of term insurance for most people, okay? Because a lot of cash values require more money and they may blow up when times get tough because my cash situation is strapped. Keep it simple, buy term. When you're ready to invest in education funding, all that, we can figure out the best tools to get there at that point. Is that a fair answer, Karen?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to hurry up here because I've got a couple more topics to consider so we can get to some questions. If we go to the next slide, so we talked about emergency fund, we talked about life insurance, disability. Again, what is disability? If you get hurt, okay, the fact that some company will continue paying you a paycheck. Okay, well, that's important because accidents happen. People can get hurt. Okay, a lot of people can get disability through their jobs, and that's a great thing. If you can, they're usually very cheap. You know, it costs me $1.15 a paycheck or something to make sure my paycheck is is insured. Now, there's short-term disability, long-term disability. Typically, you want to have enough in an emergency fund to carry you for 30 days, so you don't have to get the short-term disability. All you do is pay for the long-term disability. Okay, so that's a typical way to structure it. So again, this is why one concept layers upon the other. Okay, it is important that you protect your income. Most companies or disability policies won't pay you 100%. They may say, how much do you make, what type of industry you in, and then cover about in Florida anyways, about 2/3 up to 2/3 of your income. Okay, so it's good for you to know this. It's a way to safeguard for hopefully not too much. If your job doesn't offer it, it does get a little bit more expensive. But again, how much more expensive is it for you not to have a paycheck at all? So something to consider when you're doing your budget. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then next slide, we talked about emergency fund, life insurance, disability insurance, health insurance. Again, look at the statistics, people. 65% of bankruptcies are caused by medical issues. Okay, you couldn't go to work, then you have all these medical bills, things of that nature. Okay, that's very tough. Okay, and I get it. I've seen people in my office. Over half of Americans do not have enough in savings to cover their annual deductible. Here's again the layering effect. If you have enough savings, hopefully a fully funded, you can cover your deductible, and then you're good because then you have the insurance kick in. Okay, but yet if you have less than $1,000, most people don't have a less than $1,000 deductible, then that's where it gets kind of dicey. So these all layer on top of each other. Again, not that I want to belabor the importance of insurance, but you see how it meshes in with the emergency fund, with being out of debt, etc. 59% of Americans with medical debt use up most or all of their savings. Okay, because they're paying the debt versus if they had health insurance. Okay, and the average hospital stay costs $5,220 per day. These aren't my numbers. These are statistics. Okay, done. So why should I get it? Because it's important to avoid risk. Again, I'm as optimistic and positive as you'll find them, but you want to protect yourself so you can focus on building, you know, and that's what we're going to talk about next week, investing and building. Okay, and the last piece is estate planning. If we go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the last piece I'm going to talk about. We're going to get to our questions here in a few minutes. Okay, an estate plan is an intentional instruction, okay, for what to happen, okay, if I'm either injured without reason, or if I pass away. Again, I get, you know, when we talked about who's going to do this subject, okay, it's tough because I got the gloomy, the eerie conversation. I'm not telling you you're going to die. Who needs an estate plan? It's not just if you die. What if you become disabled? You know, I had a story of a young lady in New York that became disabled. She was in a coma. Okay, and just somebody I knew. Okay, so she couldn't pay her bills, and this is before she was on everything automatic. So she was starting to receive foreclosure letters and things of that nature. She had the money. Okay, she had the money, but she hadn't authorized anyone to pay the bills on her behalf. So a good estate plan will address some of these issues of saying if somebody needs to make a decision because I get to the hospital, I'm unconscious, who makes a decision of if I get operated or if I receive a certain medication? So it's giving powers of attorney, okay? And that's where you see that they're healthcare surrogate. Do I pull the plug or not? Okay, there's a story in Florida, Terry Schiavo. She was married, went into a coma, and the doctors were asking the husband, what should we do? And he said, let's pull the plug. But the parents are like, no, that's our baby. We're not pulling the plug. It became a lawsuit. Okay, a battle, and they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, if Terry would have had something in writing, it would have avoided this family stress. Okay, so this is why an estate plan is important. So I know I've rushed through risk management. Okay, but why is that? If we go to the next slide, because your goal in this piece is to protect your current and future wealth from the mishaps of life. I wish you the best as far as positive, you know, energy and wishing you, but life happens. Okay, so how do we do this? We perform a self-risk assessment and implement an appropriate plan. So I know I just covered a mouthful. We want to get to what you are interested in knowing. So with that said, I'm going to start asking questions. I'm going to start addressing some of these questions. I'm going to invite Janet to join us again, so turn her camera back on. If you ask the question in the chat, please make sure you bring it over into the Q&A, because I'm focusing on the Q&A section of the toolbar. So please make sure it's brought over there, or else I probably won't see it, okay? So I'm going to go through here. Let's see, I have $16,000 in subsidized federal loans, but it's split up as 10 different accounts. Yes, the student loan split up. I have the means to pay my debt now, but I heard that my score will drop. Okay, if I pay them all at once. How should I pace paying off the accounts? Should I only stick to minimum payments? Karen, what do you think about this as a person who knows a lot of people with student loans?
Well, you know, the one thing that we have to remember is that your credit score and your credit, that just tells me how well you know how to manage debt. It doesn't really tell me how good you are at building your own wealth. If you have the money to pay off your student loans, go ahead and pay them off. Unless you think that your credit is going to be used in the near future for something major, you really don't need a credit. If you go into this mindset of really getting out of debt and no longer using credit to pay for things, credit really almost becomes unnecessary.
Oof, that's a strong statement. Now, I'm always going to qualify because Karen's hardcore, okay? And she can be because she's making the life work for her, okay? But yes, when you go buy a house, you're going to need a good credit score, okay? But I want you to understand that what we're taught about credit score is not typically all correct all the time, because again, I have no car debt. I have no credit card debt. I haven't had it in years, and yet I have an 800+ credit score. How does that work? People don't understand that, okay? But it's not just about, me having all the, there's a debt to income ratio. So some people say, oh, I should leave cards open. Well, not necessarily, okay? Because if you have too much credit available, that could be a negative against you relative to your income, okay? So there's all courses on credit building and things of that nature. I'm not saying, oh, you disregard your credit, but I will say if you follow some of these tools, these instructions, your credit will still be great because I owe nothing to anyone. I have all this disposable income, and I'm putting 20% down on my house. I'm a good risk, and that's what their credit institutions are looking to invest their money in. It's a good risk. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah.
See Janet going yes, so I'm gonna say we
yes.
all approve that. All right, very good. I'm curious to know. Oops, I just moved. If you recommend doing the snowball effect to cut down student loan debt, same thing here. Or tackling biggest loans with highest interest rate first. Okay, so we kind of addressed this. Yes, mathematically, highest interest rate first makes sense. Okay, in reality, most people don't stick it through because the highest interest rate might be this, gigantic loan, and it takes 4 years to pay that off. Meanwhile, you have these other 5 loans that are smaller that if you paid them off, I bet you'd be more inspired and more, okay, look, now I had 6. I still have this big one over here with higher interest rate, but I'm down to 1. Okay, so that shows progress. Okay, so please get that with. I can get as nerdy mathematical as the next person, and yes, mathematically, highest interest rate makes sense. If you are the anal engineering type that will stick it through no matter what, yes, go for it. Okay, I just know in my 20 years experience, it's not the way most people are wired in this society. They need the constant motivation. Again, the gym example, gym memberships rise in January, and by March is not happening. You need the constant motivation. Does that sound fair, Janet? I know you have a lot of these conversations.
No, yes, I believe so. It's difficult when you are tackling the topic of debt. It's something that we don't want to look at. It's not pleasurable to think that we have, this immense amount of debt looming over our heads. And, much like Karen and Paul were saying, I think when you start tackling the small ones, you start really, gaining your confidence back and seeing that it's not such, a topic that you want to shy away from. You start seeing the difference that it's making slowly but surely. So I think that that's a great way to really tackle, your debt elimination strategy.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, and if I just may add something real quick, when I had to sit down with my husband and go through all of the debt, it's scary. It is. You don't know where you're gonna see, but at the end of the day, it's just tackling it head on and saying, okay, we're gonna create a plan and we're gonna stick to it. And believe it or not, 18 months went by so quickly, and here we are 6 years later, and I shared with you all the things that now we do with our money. So you can do it.
Yes. Now, it says, what about consolidating rather than attacking one balance at a time? Okay, this is a tricky one. Remember, I'm dealing with 2 issues. I'm dealing with math and I'm dealing with human behavior. Okay, yes, if you were able to consolidate all your debt into a lower interest paying, aggregate, that's great. The challenge is, oh, look, now I have these 0 balance credit cards here. And, but I can use this one here because it's enough. No, you're adding onto the pile. So yes, theoretically, if you can consolidate into one at a lower interest rate, it makes sense to do it. Realistically, if you do that, cut up all your credit cards. Cut up on everything else that's a 0 balance to avoid the temptation, okay? And again, I'm just being real. I'm just talking from things I've seen in the last 20 years of people doing. So, because I've had people say that, and they did it, and then 5 years later, they're in a deeper hole, okay? Not because they're bad people. it's hard, people. I know this is not the easiest stuff, as Janet just mentioned. Is that a fair answer, guys?
Yeah, Paul, and if I could chime in, I'd also, with consolidating, I think it's fair to also mention what sort of implications getting into a consolidation plan really comes with. You know, most of the time, I think people are not really aware that their accounts will be closed, so they will no longer have access to that. And then also how that translates into, you know, the credit scores, the credit reports. And, you know, it's fair to really sort of sit down and see the long game of making the plan versus paying off each individual one as you go, if you're able to. So really sort of measuring the short-term goals versus the long-term, because if, say, you do need your credit for whatever reason, you know, in this case, we're touching on buying a home, which you do typically need a credit score for. Is that something that is in your particular situation? Is that coming up for you? So then perhaps, you know, you want to think of alternatives as opposed to a debt consolidation plan.
That's exactly right. I do want to say this. It's 5 o'clock or 5:01 according to my computer. So this was scheduled to go till 5. Okay, but we still have a few more questions on the docket. I'm going to invite Karen and Janet to stay on a little bit longer so we can answer the questions for those who want to stay on longer. Obviously, no one in the audience is committed to staying, but if you want to stay on, I'm happy to stay on longer and continue answering the questions. Are you okay with that?
Yes, of course.
We're here.
Okay, awesome. Let's try to get through some of these. Okay, so Jesus says, in this example, if you pay off the first, do you keep using 350 for future debt servicing, or do you add an extra 350 equals 700?
Yeah. So they're talking about the snowball method. Yeah, what you're going to do is just continue just adding the 350 every month and just kind of adding it to the next balance.
Yeah, so it's not an extra 350 you're adding every month. If you have a surplus of 350, you continue adding that 350 to your debt, but you're rolling it over as you start paying off stuff to the next debt. Okay, so it's not that you keep adding 350 to it. It's just, here's my surplus. I know what my minimum payments are. I'm gonna throw an extra 350 in this example on top of that and keep snowballing it to the next debt. So yeah, that's a great question. Mm-hmm. Let's see, what else? If you have outstanding, try to start paying that. Well, we kind of already addressed that. Pay it off. Okay, how can you have a high FICO score if you don't have credit? You don't have a high FICO score if you don't have credit. Okay, so here I'm going to redirect the question saying, why do you want a high FICO score? Okay, because, you know, some people say, oh, I need to have good credit. Why do you need good credit? Okay, well, to me, the one reason to get good credit is to buy a house. If you apply these principles diligently, at some point that should be the only reason you need good credit. Okay, because hopefully you're buying a car cash, and you're paying your vacations cash, and you have no reason to borrow anything, so your credit score, and I say, because there's such an emphasis on credit score, okay, in this country, people, I know people with great credit scores that are broke, and I know people that are millionaires that have horrible credit scores, okay? So it's not just about the credit score, it's what you're doing to empower yourself financially. And hopefully the credit score becomes one little piece in one specific circumstance, and only one little piece, because you've done all these things to say, I don't need it. I got the cash. Cash is king, believe it, people. It really is in many circumstances. How much should payout for life insurance be, and how much should I be paying monthly for the premium? Oof, that depends. It depends on how much life insurance you need, okay? They do take a physical on certain amounts, so if you have any health conditions, so you want to keep it as low as possible. That's why I highly recommend term. I do think insurance is important, okay? If I diminish the importance of insurance, I have life insurance, okay? Because I have a wife and kids. I just have very cheap life insurance. It's called term. So if something happens to me, they're gonna get a nice payout, okay? And I keep paying that because I do believe that if I'm not around, those are my kids, I'm still called to, you know, help them financially. So you wanna, I hate to have the depends answer, but usually you can have it, you know, in the, the low double digits if you're younger, mid double digits if you're a little older, and it all depends on the face amount. Is that a fair? I know it's not a very exact answer, but it really does depend.
Yeah, I would just say just get some quotes. There's resources where you can just get a quote online, put in your date of birth if you have really any health issues. And for a term policy, you shouldn't be looking for anything that's really expensive. It really is relatively cheap.
Okay, very good. It says, I only have debt. The only debt I have is about $13,000 in car loans. I have enough in savings to pay this off. This is a good one. But I am saving for a house. Do you suggest putting savings toward my auto loan or a down payment as a mortgage? What say ye?
I mean, I would say it depends, right? It's in this case, do you need the house because you are in a situation where you need to buy a home right away and you need the money to pay for the home? And once you're in the home, then you'll pay off the car. I mean, I'm always going to advocate for you to pay off, if you have the money, to pay off the car. Now, understanding that if you need to move to a new place and you need a new home, then it would make more sense for you to have the money for a down payment because you'll need it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get the home. So it's one of those that it really depends on your situation. And hopefully, it's not a matter of moving right now because you have some type of situation where you have to move, but more of something that, you know, you can do down the road. So
yeah, some people like this, you know, it depends, because if you need a place to live, obviously we want you to find a place to live. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, a couple of things. If it's, oh, I'm tired of paying rent because I'm paying, you know, throwing money out the window. Well, yes, but understand, when you get a mortgage, the first X amount of years plus decade plus, you're only paying 90% of it as interest. So you're not really paying, you're still throwing money away. You're giving it to interest. So if you have to wait 2-3 years to get a house, okay, well, you didn't really miss much as far as, you know, throwing money away. But that might be the 2-3 years that you got rid of a car payment, which you said the average was like $300-400 a month. Well, I was able to pay off my car. Now I have an extra $400 a month, which is about $5,000 a year, to accelerate my down payment, which I'm always going to advocate about 20% down to avoid PMI. I know I'm speaking very quickly, but man, I love this stuff. You don't want to pay anything you don't have to. So it depends. If you don't have the need for a house today, I'm a big proponent. Get rid of that car debt. Stop paying interest to anybody else. Make the car payment that you have, make it to yourself now. And then recuperate that 13 as quick as possible and go for your house. Okay, so let me slow down. I know somebody said you're speaking way too fast. It's the New Yorker and me doing this 20 years, but hopefully you got the gist of that. I'm a big proponent of paying off the car unless you have an emergency where you need a place to live. And even then, getting rid of the debt and then paying yourself the car payment to recoup that money is usually the first route that I take. So that, again, you're paying yourself. Get in the habit of paying yourself and owing no one anything. Fair enough? Okay, let's see. I have a few accounts that have gone to collections. What strategies and approaches can be taken to pay off that debt? Well, I mean, Karen, I think you kind of said it. You got to pay it.
Yeah, and what probably what you need to do is just, again, make a list of all the debts and call your collectors and call these agencies and say, how much would you take if I had the money? How much would you take? And then work on a payment plan with them. It's, again, it can be scary, but sometimes you just have to deal with the situation, and it's a matter of just sitting down, writing everything down, and giving them a call and see what they can work with, how they can work with you.
And this is, again, where cash is king, because if you make that call and you have cash, they're more willing to have the conversation, because they're not going to go into another installment payment plan with you typically. Okay. So yes, if you're already in collections, credit's not an issue, right? So you can negotiate. If you've built up cash, it's scary, but believe me, a lot of them are willing to, especially on an economy where a lot of people are defaulting on debt and loans. If they can collect something from you, they get paid a commission on what they collect. So they want to collect something, okay, versus you going to bankruptcy or whatever. So that would be the approach that you might want to consider taking if you don't see an end in sight as far as paying this all off. I have a large outstanding interest on my federal student loans. What is your recommended approach to starting to pay that down?
Snowball method.
Yeah, I mean, at the end, right, Janet, at the end of the day, there's no secret. You know, you be careful of those. Here's a way to secretly, you know, pay off your loan quick. At the end of the day, you just got to pay it off, right? So just have a strategy and a plan, right? Is that what you encourage people to do?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, sort of touching back to the collections question, I think it's important to also let our, attendees know not to be fearful. You know, I think if your accounts do end up going into collections, and you have other outstanding bills that you're also sort of stressing how you're going to pay them, because we are in the midst of the pandemic. I think, I'm such a big believer in communication, and you'd be really surprised what sort of agreements, what sort of, middle ground you can really get to if you are open to communicating with your creditors or anybody that you owe money to. If you are in that sticky situation where you know, maybe you cannot pay the full amount, but you can pay partially. I think it's just a matter of really reaching out and, you know, not hitting that desperation point where you just rather ignore it and let things that maybe are not currently in collections, you know, sort of downward spiral into collections. Just taking a proactive approach to also open those lines of communication and see what you can do and sort of what negotiations you can kind of come to.
Yeah, and I see that Joy mentioned that Joy negotiated during this time. It was stressful, but worth it. So that's, again, this is not theoretical. We've seen this work. Again, not easy, but thank you for sharing that, Joy. It says, I have federal student loans from undergrad and grad school. Is it better to the consolidation question, my multiple interest rate loans and pay in large chunks, or should I not consolidate and pay them all off individually, although they have different rates? Okay. I mean, mathematically speaking, if you can consolidate them into a lower rate loan, if you have 10 loans that are all at 4%, it doesn't make a difference that or one loan of the same amount that's 4%. That's what people don't get, that 4% on everything is the same 4% on one thing, okay, of the same amount. So there's no trick to consolidating unless you refinance into a lower amount, okay? So the large chunk thing is, can I get the interest rate? I mean, if you have a large chunk, then that means pay that off whether you have it separate or not. You know, use that large chunk, whether it's just 6 cards or 1 card. But I would say if you keep them separate, Karen talked about the snowball effect, paying them off slowly, the lowest balance first. And again, if you can get into a lower interest rate, that's always going to behoove you in the long term mathematically. Okay, what is the best methods to save money, CD or high yield account? Again,
anybody who has the highest rate.
That's
they'll
exactly
offer
right.
you the highest interest rate.
Here's the thing is, I don't want to offend any bankers in the room who sell CDs. I don't like CDs. Typically, CDs lock my money. I don't like locking my money and giving anybody power over my money. And I can pretty much get about the same in a high yield account than I can in a shorter term, you know, smaller CD. So again, I shared a real life example. I think Karen has this too. We have high yield money market accounts. Those are good. I'm in control of my money. I can take it out without any penalty. I can move it over if I need it, but it's giving me a little bit higher interest rate. So that's that. Would you agree with that, Jen? I know Karen's doing that as well.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is because you have options, I think it's, you know, what you were saying about how it locks in your money, which could be a downfall for many. I think as adults, we want to, you know, sort of diversify and make sure that our money is accessible within a reasonable amount of time, given any sort of emergency.
Right.
But it's also nice for, you know, say if you are a parent, I know for my kids, when they would get birthday cards with money, you know, for them, they can afford that sense, you know, that longer extended amount of time for their account. So it's really sort of kind of playing, you know, playing a little bit around with what different accounts have to offer in terms of timing, and then also, you know, our personal goals. So if we need, you know, if we anticipate needing money quicker, sooner than later, then perhaps, you know, a longer term like a CD might not work. But if you have the time, if you have the luxury of time, or you could, you know, also put your money somewhere else and on a CD that could give you a higher interest rate, then that might be worth exploring as well.
Okay. How much is too much to have in your emergency fund? And what are some good starting point activities for you to continue to build your wealth as someone who's more financially basic? Okay, well, I gave you an idea, you know, 3 to 6 months is a typical rule of thumb, depending on your particular circumstances, okay? 3 to 6 months of expenses, okay? So let's say my monthly expenses are $3,000 a month, okay? Well, I should have anywhere from $9,000 to $18,000, you know, if you want to round off the number to 20 to make it a nice simple number. I would put in a high yield money market as a savings account, emergency fund. Once you have that, okay, then we can start talking about different types of opportunities, as Janet was mentioning, time horizons, and what makes sense to start creating and diversifying your portfolio. We are actually going to talk about this next week, okay, which is the investing. So this will be in my next segue to make sure to invite you to next, well, it's in 2 weeks, it's September 9th, okay, to the Charla, which is going to be about investing. And you'll see how this all comes together. So I'm saying that as a segue because it is about 5:15 and we still have a bunch of questions. This is what I'm going to do. Last charla, we actually took a lot of these questions with us and we answered them individually over the next couple of days, and we got the answers back out to everyone. So Janet, Karen, if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to offer the same thing to the listeners whose questions haven't been answered yet. we can take the questions back, and I'm committing Jessica and the team to get us the questions so we can answer them, and we promise we'll get it back, because we want to be conscious of people's time, but we also want to answer your questions. That being said, I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to encourage you to join us on September 9th, where we will be talking about the investment charla. If you haven't listened to this one because you got here late, or you need a refresher on this one, or the previous one, I'm going to encourage you to listen to those, because these are building blocks, okay? And they all go together because they help you create a plan for your financial future to the next level. So guys, thank you so much. Janet, thank you. I want to thank Tony, Lou, your respective teams for letting these conversations happen. Here's some resources. You will be getting a follow-up email with these links, okay? As well as the resources, as they mentioned, on foryourfinancialwellness.com. All of these resources will be there, okay? And Algen Academy, we shared a link. It's no cost. We're offering it for free for anybody who listens to this, and a lot of this information is there, as well as these tools. So guys, thank you for listening. We look forward to hearing from you soon, and have a great rest of your day.